Hello and welcome to the What's the Crack bodybuilding podcast with your host Neil Rennie. So this is now, I believe, the sixth episode. Somebody I've wanted on for ages is Dr. Dean. I kept calling you Doctor the first time I met you, but we'll
Yeah.
go with Dean. Dean is probably the smartest guy that I'm going to have on this podcast, which is good because it's making me anxious already. And he is the formulator of supplement needs, educator for as long as I remember as well, and a very good amateur bodybuilder in his own right. So Dean, mate, I really appreciate you coming on this.
No, I really appreciate it, Neil. I think when I started off in this sort of consultation journey, education journey, you're probably one of the first ones to reach out to me years ago. So it's mad that I'm still here doing this and people are still interested in hearing from me. So very glad to be on.
I remember that I say it's about probably about 70 pounds ago now, and many, many years ago as well. But no, that was one of the first ones I kind of reached out to kind of learn something off. So, mate, there's been a load of questions in, and as I sort of joked about before the podcast, some of them are so niche that you should just book a consultation with them, to be honest, like, because some of them are so crazily niche. But we're going to go through quite a few questions because there's going to be a huge amount of value in this, I feel. But I
Yeah.
kind of want to know, Dean, a bit like about your background because I'm not sure how many people actually know about like how you get into this side of things.
Yeah. I mean, so my background, so originally I'd done a degree in chemistry and pharmaceutical chemistry, so about the design of drugs, how they're created, like pharmacology.
Yeah.
And then from there, I done a PhD in synthetic chemistry. And from there, that led into a career in chemical engineering. And so all throughout that time, I was doing kickboxing, and then an accident with kickboxing led to me sort of retiring out of kickboxing and transitioning to bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And throughout all that time, you're sort of looking at what's going on in bodybuilding from a like a pharmacy perspective, drug perspective, and all that sort of stuff. And you sort of start questioning some of the things that are going on. And then slowly over time, you start delving into the root causes, the what ifs of, why do certain things happen when you take maybe steroids or fat burners or even nutrition, health. And I started to, view that how we designed drugs was mainly to address symptoms rather than actually look at the root cause. And that slowly made me transition into functional medicine and looking at, the what if questions, the root cause. Why do you have blood pressure? Rather than, well, here's a blood pressure medication, just take it.
Yeah.
And so I sort of come in then, again, from just an amateur bodybuilding perspective, just as someone who wanted to really offer value for nothing else other than make sure people stay healthy, just pushed into the online space by my wife to really start getting the education out there that I knew for myself. And here we are, whatever it is, 8 or 9 years later, formulator for quite a large supplement company and the education website and everything else. So it's been nice to see the industry change over the last maybe 6 years as we've started to educate more on health, longevity. It's not been all about like who can get the biggest, you're sort of putting the caveat that, yeah, it's great to be, 250 pounds, but when you finish, what's the sort of end game to when you're no longer able to be a 250-pound bodybuilder and you're left with all these maybe side effects or health issues that happen during your career that, if someone had actually sat down and gave you some advice, some ways to mitigate those risks, you might come out the other side a little bit more healthy. So
Yeah.
that's really been my aim since ever getting on, was just to offer value to, here's some things to have a think about. The whole thing about we're sort of, we joke about coming to the end of this ancillary I guess era of people taking blood pressure medication just because, or blood glucose diabetic medication just because someone said that. You sort of, you make people question, well, do you actually need to take that? What's the validity behind it? And sure, yeah, if you have blood pressure issues and it's being caused by, one of the genetic factors that the medication addresses, then yeah, great, you might need to take it. I sort of, I don't want people taking unnecessary risks because someone's saying, oh, this is the healthiest way to do bodybuilding, because really there is no real healthy way to speak or safe way. You can minimize the risks and you can have strategies there to, protect your health, but there's no real safe way or promotion of safe way. There's a responsible way to do it. And that's sort of what hopefully I've promoted over the last few years.
Yeah, I think that's been the refreshing thing when I've sort of listened to a lot of what you said as well. It's like I think everything's with the understanding and the caveat that there isn't a safe way. It's how we like mitigate it, and you apply give people the knowledge to kind of make the decision for themselves. There's certainly that much out there. Like I heard you talking, it was like I think it was a PCA posing seminar I was at actually, and talking about people were asking a lot of questions around like cholesterol management, and you just took it to another level because I think a lot of us think we know, and to a decent degree, but then there's another level there with it. I think you were talking about HDL cholesterol and telling us about, there's actually, it's multifaceted. It's much deeper than just looking at your HDL and LDL.
Yeah, I mean it's so like even with heart risk, and heart disease risk and management of elevated cholesterol, there's a lot of like nuance to it that when someone has high LDL cholesterol, for example, so LDL is a transporter of fats in the body. Takes fats from the liver around your body because obviously fat can't exist in your bloodstream. Although a small amount does on your blood test, you've got your triglycerides, which is the amount of fat in your blood. But high levels of fat in your blood is very dangerous because it causes, direct correlation to arteriosclerosis and plaque formation. But when you look at your LDL, if it's elevated, it could be because you're eating a lot of fat. So your body's making more LDL to bring that around the body. But then the next step down from that is the LDL just doing its job or is it arterogenic? And we know that different types of LDL exist. And so LDL can have a protein on the surface, ApoB, and that ApoB protein we know is very arterogenic. So it makes that LDL particle high risk. So you could have high LDL, low ApoB, and your risk is going to be, low moderate. Or you could have high LDL, high ApoB, and you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is you could have an LDL value that's 2 in the green, but you could have a load of ApoB. So now that green, good LDL ranged value is actually quite sinister because you think everything looks great because your blood work's green, but underneath the surface, you're generating plaque because you've got that ApoB being formed. So it's always been a statement that I've said that just because your blood work is green or in range doesn't mean that you're disease free. It'd be a very naive way to do your bloods and look at everything and it's green light, green means go, back on cycle I go, or I look perfectly healthy on my bloods, nothing's happened here, and then 10 years later you have a heart attack because your blood work was actually saying something that you weren't paying attention to.
And I think a lot of these like blood check, like while it's great to do it, they're somewhat limited in terms of what the things they're actually looking for. I was using Medichecks for a long time. They certainly weren't, highlighting that side of things.
Yeah, like you've when you look at like that's taking the functional medicine approach side of like, well, your LDL's raised, why? And you're asking all these questions to get back to that root cause. Um, the other side of it that we've understood is that oxidative stress when you've not got enough antioxidants in your body. And we know that plaque formation from LDL happens when LDL gets oxidized, when it gets damaged. So if you don't have enough antioxidants, the LDL can get oxidized, it becomes damaged, and your immune system creates a response to address that oxidized LDL. So it gets rid of it out of your bloodstream. And that creates your white blood cells come in and eat up all that oxidized LDL, and they create what are called foam cells, and they all stick together. And basically, that's our understanding now what actual plaque is inside the arteries, mainly are those foam cells. So again, going back to the LDL being green, you might have low ApoB, but that LDL that's green could be all oxidized. So again, you're developing plaque from that healthy ranged LDL. So there's definitely a lot of layers that once you understand all these things, your blood work can be a bit of a scary picture because you think you're healthy and you look at all these things and the correlations look great. But unless you're doing like 3D diagnostics or organ imaging, like an MRI of your heart or an echocardiogram, you don't really know what the structure integrity of your heart is, how your heart is functioning. Even kidney ultrasound, liver ultrasound, all these organ imaging. If you're a serious bodybuilder, you should at least get these done at every 2 to 3 years. It's an added cost, but it means that once you see maybe a small bit of fat develop in your liver, once you start seeing a bit of scarring in your kidneys, you can anticipate the damage is being done. What are you going to do about it? Than being caught out when, you've got kidney disease, you've got liver disease, which, are relatively symptomless until it's too late.
That was one of my questions, actually, which I think was quite good. You've kind of addressed it already to some degree, but like what sort of testing do you think sort of like assisted bodybuilders essentially should be doing that maybe the majority of them maybe are not doing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously blood work, very important. Like your sort of basic top level blood work where you're looking at your hematology, so your red and white blood cells, your liver enzymes, your kidney electrolytes, lipids like cholesterol, your thyroid. Thyroid antibodies is another one that no one really ever checks, and that sort of gives you an insight into gut health and developing maybe thyroid autoimmunity. Your hormones, making sure that you're making a clear guess on if you are using underground stuff that is actually dosed properly. Is it what I'm supposed to be taking? Um, Beyond that, then maybe an advanced cardiac blood marker test, like what we talked about there, where you're looking at ApoA, which is the protein on your HDL, ApoB, which is the protein on your LDL, your LPA, which is a very arthrogenic particle that you tend to inherit genetically. There's a few other APO markers that you can check without boring people. But doing that check at least, once a year, once every 15, 16 months, gives you a deeper understanding of your cholesterol than what a normal panel's saying. Then beyond that, an echocardiogram at least maybe every 3 years, if not every 2 years. Again, that's going to give you a picture of how well each of the chambers of your heart is pumping, how thick has the septum in the middle of your heart become, how well is your left ventricle pumping out blood, and how big has that chamber gotten? Because obviously, left ventricle hypertrophy happens when we bodybuild or use steroids. You get the ejection fraction of how well or how much blood is being pushed out of the heart. With that, the echo will have an ECG, so you're looking for any electrical abnormalities that may have happened to any of the muscle cells of the heart. Liver ultrasound, kidney ultrasound, a little more technical. So a kidney ultrasound, probably if you have blood pressure issues, maybe every 3 or 4 years if you suspect that something was up on your bloods. Luckily,
If you were having high blood pressure issues, you would maybe go down that route.
So what you'd be sort of looking at a kidney ultrasound would be if, let's say, your creatinine was trending up over time, or even then, if your creatinine is trending up over time, you might be gaining more muscle tissue. So that means you've got more creatine metabolism. Normally you check cystatin C, which is a more advanced marker of kidney health, because creatinine is influenced by creatine, and the creatine stores your body. Cystatin C is a much larger protein that's localized at the kidney. So if the kidneys are damaged, you're going to see a lot of cystatin C come out into the bloodstream. If those two are, raised and your filtration rate of your kidneys are being impacted, that's sort of when you'd maybe want to do an ultrasound of kidneys to see, is there leakage at the kidney? Is there any scarring? And at that point, if there is scarring starting to develop in the kidneys, you'd want to start thinking carefully around, your current body weight, your blood pressure management, your electrolyte, your hydration status, all these things of, is it really worth continuing being a bodybuilder if I know I'm going to end up with, kidney disease based on what I'm doing currently?
Then can I ask you this actually, just because obviously you speak there, and I think there's some people, ignorance is bliss to a degree. See, having that level of knowledge, and I don't want to put words in your mouth in terms of your own personal usage. Have you ever thought, what the fuck am I even bothering for? When you have that level of sort of knowledge around the potential side effects of it.
Yeah, I mean, so like everything, it's always going to be some sort of, responsible decision. And I mean, even when you're going down a pathway of, what you're considering to do, that's why I'm very, I'm always never really openly engaged in what I might be doing personally. And that's sort of where, the emojis come in and people are like, oh, what's a tomato? I'm like, well, put two and two together what a tomato is. And so you're not, because we're in an age now of open social media language where someone puts up a cycle of, oh, I'm doing 600 tests, 600 primo, 300 tren. And then some 15-year-old looks at it and goes, oh, that's what he's taking. I'm just going to go get that. And you just walk down the gym and ask someone and you get it. When I first started bodybuilding, we had a lot of like the great, Irish legendary bodybuilders who I looked up to getting into bodybuilding. It was a it was a closed circle that, someone would walk in and go, oh, I want a bottle of test, and you would have been effed out of the gym or the supplement store or wherever it was going on, that you would have been like, no chance, pal. So it's it's evolved over time where the accessibility of these things has really opened out. That's more so why I feel it's really important to offer, a voice of opinion to try and educate that. I always tell a story of being in one of the gyms back home in Dublin that I was getting changed after training, and these four kids, you could say, like 15-year-olds, come in from the secondary school beside the gym and went, Mister, what are you taking? And I went, sorry, lads. Yeah, Mister, what do you take?
Not
I
alone.
said, how about, lads, you come back to me in 10 years' time when you've not missed a training session, not missed a meal, and then we can have a chat over maybe what I'm using. And I said to one of them, for example, tell me what you eat. And he goes, oh, Mister, I eat loads every day. And he's like, in the morning, my ma has porridge and I put a scoop of protein in it. At lunch, I have a chicken baguette with a packet of crisps and maybe protein milk. After the gym, I have a protein shake. And then I go home and my mom has maybe chicken with some veg and potatoes. I'm like, right. I said, you're probably eating about 2,100 calories if you're lucky. I said to him, for one thing, you're eating nowhere near what you need for performance, and half the stuff you're eating is junk. And he's like scratching his head looking at me. And then I listed what I eat, where like at the time I was in an off season, I was like 4,800 calories or something. They're looking at like, how'd you eat all that, mister? And you're like, the basics of building muscle tissue is training and nutrition. The drugs facilitate recovery so you can train harder, you can train more intense, you can retain more protein. It's not magic. So unless you have those pillars of progressively overloading with training, recovering properly, adequate sleep, adequate food, the drug conversation shouldn't even come into the equation. I mean, even a strength example where you're like asking them, like, not to sort of be the cliche, but you're asking like, how much can you bench press? How much can you deadlift? How much can you squat? And there used to be this old thing, like when I first started getting into bodybuilding, I was like, you have to be able to bench 3 plates, squat 4, and deadlift 5. And then at that point,
Yeah.
you've built a solid natural strength base. Obviously, not everyone's going to have the mechanics to do all that, the biomechanics, but as a benchmark, being able to bench press 140 kilos, squat close to 200, and deadlift close to, 220, 240 naturally before you even go down the route of using anything. That shows that you've, understood training principles, recovery principles, nutrition principles before you even go down that enhanced route.
I think that's the thing with it. There's such a widespread. People are very like open about it and get praised for like being open about their steroid use. But on the same regards, then if you are especially a big name, there has to be a level of responsibility that comes alongside that as well. So I think it's a blessing and a curse, that side of things, now that we have so much access to information that people can misuse it easier.
Yeah, and then I mean even the other side of it, and I see it through having conversations, consultations with top level bodybuilders. Some of them use quite a lot less than what is thought of it. And then when these guys are transparent about, well, this is what I use, all of a sudden it's, oh, that's BS. So, they're still skeptical that no matter how transparent you are, it's like, oh, you didn't do that. You must be taking all this. And yeah, we've had levels of abuse within bodybuilding, but there are guys who have used relatively little. But the other side of the equation is, what someone is using now currently doesn't mean what they used to get where they are now as well. So, if someone's using very low dosages now, most of the top level guys who I've, worked alongside have used big dosages to get to where they are now, and then the maintenance requires not as much. So, from a risk perspective, there is probably a high level of risk with high dosage in order to get to top level, professional or even top level amateur to progress into being a competitive professional. But when you get there, the principle of recovery, the potential of retaining tissue, you probably need a lot less if everything else is optimized. So the
Yeah.
transparency, as things become more accessible, and we're never going to go backwards now. If anything, it's going to be even more open. The stigma surrounding drug use is slowly fading away, to speak. I mean, you've got the enhanced games in talks that people want to open the floodgates and just go, right, no holds barred, what can we achieve as humans just for pure viewing pleasure, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that'll be interesting. I'd probably watch it. That's the thing. But like, I mean, is there anything you see in the state of bodybuilding at the minute where you're like, that is a worrying trend? That's something that like would cause you concern?
Well, I've said it for the last maybe 4 years. Mental health, big thing surrounding um dopamine metabolism issues in the brain, potential. I'm not going to say mental addiction because it's not the same as a psychoactive drug, but I've seen it enough times where guys have recovered back after using steroids. They've recovered after doing PCT, and their brain chemistry hasn't recovered yet. And I mean, I probably, have that conversation nearly every week of someone has recovered, done PCT, and they've no libido. And they're like, oh, maybe I have low testosterone. And I'm like, it's not that you've got low testosterone, it's that your brain chemistry hasn't come back to how it was. So, yes, the easy solution is go back on gear and your brain chemistry will go back to how it was. You'll make more dopamine, your sex drive will come back. But that's a shortcut. The long-term strategy is, if you've recovered your natural test level back to, let's say, 20, you're in a good position naturally. Your brain chemistry, depending on how long you've been on for, the electrical potential of your brain has changed, that it's looking for a lot of dopamine to get stimulated. And it's just a matter of time for those nerves of your brain to calm back down to that natural level of testosterone. The problem is there's no, I guess, scientific validity on how long that takes to reverse. And it can be, 2-3 years before you come back to feeling normal versus how you were before you took anything. And so in that instance, someone's looking and thinking, so it's going to take me 2-3 years before I feel, sexually stimulated again. That there's a slippery slope of, I'm just going to go back on gear and feel good again. That, yes, that in theory is an addiction, but it's not like a psychological addiction, as to speak, where you need the drug to function. It's just that you've now relapsed back to using in order to correct that brain chemistry back to how it was when you were on. So that's the biggest worrying thing, that depending on even, using tren, using very strong androgens where you're driving a lot of that dopamine synthesis, that, maybe in 10 years time, depending on this, abuse, to speak, or open access to tren and the such, that developing teenagers who see, someone use tren, decide to use that with test, that when they come off, their brain chemistry, because they're so young and their brain is still developing up until they're like 23, 24, they're going to have issues with long-term neural chemistry or personality, or even, emotional maturity issues that are going to become highlighted when they're like late 30s, early 40s. And that will put a big burden on, mental health services.
I mean, there is a short-term impact in that as well, isn't there? In terms of like how you're feeling within that moment, or even I always think, now this is me, this is me throwing stuff out. Tell me I'm wrong, but like that post-show period when people are using very high androgens throughout that contest prep, I feel a lot of people have quite a lull thereafter. Obviously, there's multiple facets behind that, but to me, there has to be a large part of that just due to downgrading of androgens around that time.
Yeah, I mean, like you're you're driving your dopamine sky high with high dosages. That, that's where my philosophy was always surrounding, you do TRT. So if you're not going to come off, you do a dose of TRT where you go to a physiological level of testosterone with no anabolics. And then you do cycles of anabolics on top of your TRT. So the old school approach is, you come off completely and you do a couple of cycles per year. Coming off completely is probably not going to be the most wisest thing, knowing you're going to crash your hormones just to go back on again. That maintaining a normal, natural level of testosterone probably serves your long-term health better. So in that instance, similarly there, from a psychological perspective, you have to accept, I guess, or understand that going from a high level of androgens down to a physiological level, you're going to lose tissue because of you're losing that nitrogen or amino acid retention from the high dosage. You're not going to be as strong, but it's more so the nitrogen retention from the higher dose. So you have to get used to going back to looking not a normal person, but looking at a body weight that you probably would be at naturally with TRT versus, being on. So you could be 105, 106 kilos when you're on, and all of a sudden you're falling back down to, 93, 94 by the time you get to the end of like a TRT phase.
Yeah.
That you have to psychologically understand that that is how you look, and you can't get addicted to how you look at being the bigger person. Because when all said and done and you finish, if you have a personality disorder of you're associated at being this bigger person, you lose your identity then when you stop bodybuilding. Or, people are like, oh, what happened to you? You used to be so big. That if you're happy with how you look at that physiological level, it's a lot easier psychologically to accept that, period of what we spoke about there, even post-show, and you've maybe come off all the androgens, all the sort of cosmetic look that you get from orals. You get a little softer. Being able to understand that part of the process before it even comes to an end is a big factor. And, and that can play into obviously the high level of androgens, creating the cosmetic look as well.
I think there's definitely a skill in that, in terms of being able to accept that that isn't you. Like, it's almost like a borrowed body. And I can see how, like, certainly the deeper I've got into bodybuilding, the more size I put on, the more I became slightly more than I'd like to attach to that element of myself. But
Yeah.
I think, I think actually coming off and spending time on TRT and actually practicing in that has helped as well to some degree. I think maybe practice is the wrong word, but actually getting used to not being the big jacked roided up version of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, like, even when you turn it around the other way, and obviously muscle dysmorphia plays a small part in it, but like that smaller version of you is probably not to be, bad, but it's probably bigger than 90% of people around you, like a normal population. So you sort of have to take a step back and realize, okay, well, maybe I'm not as small as I think. Probably from a personal side with me, I've often, said to Morgan when I was a bit bigger, you'd be sort of like, am I really that big? Because people would be making comment about the size of you. And she's like, well, yeah, you've, from the back, you've got a big wide back that, people are looking at you and seeing like, oh yeah, he's big. That you don't see that version of yourself really, because you're never looking at yourself in that 3D or third person perspective. So it is difficult psychologically to, even accept how big you are, because we're always looking to be bigger in certain.
No, Dane, I don't want to get into a counseling session with you there. That's going to go down that route. But mate, there's a couple of things I do want to touch on as well. I think you talked about, HRT, and I find it interesting because I think there's a lot of people on HRT, a lot for the right reason. But is there any real like issues with long-term TRT usage in males?
Yeah, and I mean, I've started a book in the last year, and in part of the book, I discuss this aspect of when you're using androgens, they operate on mainly a genetic level. So your genome, they do have, non-genetic aspects, but it's mainly your genetics. And so the longer you're on, the potential there is for your genetics to become used to being at that higher level of androgens. So in that instance, you're sort of looking at your glucose metabolism, your fat metabolism, your thyroid metabolism all become adapted to that optimized testosterone level. And that's sort of where, not to, be harsh, but if someone's natural test level is, say, 8, which is very low naturally, and then they take TRT to move to 24 nanomole, they've tripled their total testosterone. What's the difference from someone who's naturally at 20 going up to 60? They've tripled their natural testosterone. So, you've evolved genetically to that level of 8 nanomole. You're now going to triple that level. And you're going to stay there for years upon years that, when you come off, your genetics is now changed in theory to that higher level of testosterone. That your body, like your brain, is going to take time for your cholesterol, your glucose metabolism, your thyroid metabolism. All these things can get skewed. And I've seen it quite a lot with blood work, where someone all of a sudden becomes insulin resistant because they think they can eat the same food as when they were taking TRT. So, in that instance, it's a risk that is not spoken about when someone is being, taken down the route of TRT. It's one of those ones where you're looking potentially at, is this a risk that I'm willing to accept? And is this a long-term medication that I'm going to take religiously? Then you start, getting into the muddy waters of what we've seen in the last, 4 years, like TRT plus. Or I'm going to take, testosterone and primobolan or masteron. And you start slowly edging into murky waters of, steroid abuse as opposed to hormone replacement.
Yeah.
And that needs to be carefully considered, because again, that's a slippery slope that if you are on TRT and then you're looking for more, well, you may as well just do an anabolic cycle and, adding just a small dose of Primo on top. In the example, say, of an amateur who is looking to become professional, maybe during that TRT phase, if they can't risk coming back down to a true physiological dose to lose a certain level of tissue, using a small dose of a non-aromatizing androgen might help retain more tissue during that quote unquote TRT or recovery phase, if you want to call it that way, or the new sort of term of health phase, which has a lot of, I guess, funny flaws to the term. But, it's one of those things where you think that you are doing something positive when in fact it's adding probably a lot more negatives on top. So TRT, great positives. I think, again, like the stigma of steroid abuse, it's becoming a lot more socially accepted. Every second advert on Instagram is some hormone optimization clinic or, male clinic offering TRT based on your blood work. But it's also scary when you think about it that the current environment is changing, that men are suffering with low testosterone, whether that is from poor food quality, poor sleep, excess stress, environmental pollution, not enough antioxidants. The list is endless, but something is changing that's making men have lower levels of testosterone than 40 years ago.
I mean, when you say that, I get a lot of my clients just from the starting point, whether they're lifestyle clients or bodybuilding clients, to run blood work at the start. And it has amazed me, as recently I got one back today, the amount of male clients that are running, on no drugs, but very low levels of testosterone, high levels of estrogen, high levels of prolactin even, and they've never done anything.
Yeah.
Actually, you can answer this question for me. I'll use you as a consult. I actually got a client so prolactin levels were doubled, testosterone levels were sitting around 8 nanomoles, estrogen was sitting around 200. Like, I have no idea why that would be the case, bar something, I have no idea. What would your opinion be on that side of things?
So the high estrogen, so you look at the ratio between the two. So normally a man should have a ratio of 200 to 1. So for every 200 testosterones, they make 1 estrogen. What I'll do here is I'll calculate what that ratio is for this exact guy. So let's say his test is
work for me.
test is 8, and we'll put estrogen at 200.
Yeah.
The ratio is off the top of my head is going to be quite low. It's probably going to be sub sub 60 to 1
Yeah.
is what I'm assuming. Yeah, 40 to 1.
Yeah.
So the
Okay.
average male should be 200 to 1. So he's in a very estrogen dominant environment. So prolactin is elevated in three cases: either not enough dopamine in his brain, which is what testosterone, low testosterone is going to do anyway. Too much estrogen will stimulate prolactin secretion. And so he's losing his testosterone to estrogen with that ratio. And then stress, cortisol raises prolactin. So you have to sort of look at, his body fat level, environmental toxins getting stuck in his body fat. So fat loving toxins will raise the potential for aromatase to be expressed. What is he washing himself with? What chemicals are going on his skin? What's he breathing in? What's his antioxidant balance? All these things could be contributing to, elevated estrogen burden. Does he drink alcohol? Does he support the alcohol metabolism? Glutathione intake, cruciferous vegetables, all these sort of things is liver metabolism. More than likely, a lot of the environment is causing, issues in his body where the aromatase enzyme is being overexpressed. That's triggering off the prolactin. The prolactin, more than likely, this guy suffers with impotence and has issues getting erections because of the
I would say
elevated
that,
prolactin.
but that was one of the major, like, it's one of the major concerns he was having. As you
Yeah,
just from prolactin being so high, like.
and that's because of the low dopamine, and then he will have difficulty even orgasming because of the low dopamine. It's and then these are guys who go into their GP who say, oh, I've got difficulty getting an erection, and they're given, Cialis or Viagra, which help you maintain blood flow to the penis, but don't get you sexually stimulated. And the sexual stimulation comes from dopamine. So you might be able to get like maybe a semi-hard erection, but you'll never orgasm because the dopamine level of your brain's too low.
That was
So
exactly what happened. And that was I was saying, it was like nearly masking a problem when in the environmental side is just completely
yeah.
skewed.
So in his instance, you want to lower his estrogen burden. You want to support liver detox. Maybe a medication that falsely raises dopamine of his brain. That's what cabergoline does. Um, and that just lowers prolactin to remove some of that negative effect of not being able to get an erection. But that's a short-term strategy because if estrogen's left unmanaged, the prolactin will just start rising again once you stop something like that. So that's why like P5P works. P5P increases the conversion to dopamine. So you're just artificially putting a nutrient in to raise dopamine. But he's a classic example probably of quite a lot of the normal population who suffer with erectile dysfunction and they never do that deep dive into estrogen or prolactin.
That's really interesting. I thank you for that.
No worries.
I'll tell him to watch this. Since we are talking about erections, then can we talk about fertility in terms of being on while you're on cycle, like or even coming off cycle, how that was managed?
Yeah, so when you're on, obviously your hypothalamus makes one of your master regulators of your fertility gonadotropin releasing hormone. So when you take anabolic steroids, um, you end up with a shut down hypothalamus, so you stop making gonadotropin releasing hormone, and that stops your LH and FSH production. So LH, the luteinizing hormone, makes your testosterone. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, helps with sperm production. So if they're both shut down, the more you orgasm over time, the more sperm you're losing. And obviously, you're not keeping up the replenishment, you end up with low sperm count. That's not to say you end up sterile or infertile. You can still make small amounts of sperm, but they're never going to be at a probability where you might achieve pregnancy. But in saying that, it only takes one sperm to get pregnant. So you're always going to have maybe surprise pregnancies. With restoring fertility, you normally have two options. You either fully come off and restore your brain's chemistry of FSH and LH, or you go the artificial gonadotropin route where you're using, maybe HMG with testosterone by itself to give your body artificial FSH. A lot of the flaws, you got guys who think I'm going to take Clomid to help my fertility on cycle. Clomid is useless if you're taking TRT or any type of steroid because Clomid basically acts as an estrogen receptor blocker, which helps your brain pump out more gonadotropin releasing hormone, blocks the negative effects of estrogen on your brain, which can shut down your HPTA. So that's a caveat. Most people think that when you take steroids, they're the thing that shuts you down. It's actually your estrogen goes too high and your brain makes a correlation that your estrogen's gone too high. So your brain's not really looking at your testosterone level to speak. When it sees estrogen go too high, it makes the correlation that, well, estrogen's high and that can only come from having high testosterone. There's no point in pumping out fertility hormone because the test level is too high. So in that instance, Clomid blocks estrogen's effect on your brain, which doesn't really matter to your fertility when it's shut down from having drugs in the system. And the Clomid then tells your pituitary make more LH. So again, you're not going to make more LH with Clomid because you're not making any of it really from being shut down. So these fertility protocols of, oh, take Clomid to improve fertility, just a waste of time. It's going to raise your SHBG, so you're going to lose testosterone, free testosterone, and it's going to make you moody as anything. So yes, use Clomid if you come fully off to help stabilize your brain and has its place there. But if you're on steroids or testosterone, Clomid is useless. And if someone prescribes it to you, they don't really understand what's going on.
It's amazing how many times you see that mentioned in like these fertility protocols as well. And I think that's just a prime example of actually going to somebody who knows what they're talking about. Otherwise, I mean, you're playing about your health as well to some degree. You're just wasting time and money.
You know, I've seen it even, not to like bash people, but I've seen, you know, people have come to me from endocrinologists who have told them, oh, here's Clomid, here's a prescription for Clomid. And it's the completely wrong approach because they don't really understand then what's going on in the full scheme of things. And it's worrying because, you know, these are experts in hormone health who are making these mistakes. So it's with fertility, then even restoring your fertility doesn't guarantee conception because it's all about then the health of your sperm, the DNA, the shape of the tail, how well can it swim, how well can it reach the egg, the actual DNA inside the head of the sperm, has that become fragmented and damaged? And that's something that, again, is never really checked when you do a sperm check. So if you are trying to, you know, maximize your fertility, get your DNA fragmentation checked because depending on the oxidative stress of your body, that DNA fragmentation could be high. And the egg will only tolerate about a 30% defect rate in the sperm before it will basically terminate the pregnancy. And that's why sometimes you get miscarriages with guys who are conceiving using steroids because the egg starts to develop and then it realizes it can't repair the DNA correctly and it doesn't allow the pregnancy to go to term because of the defect in the DNA.
That's incredibly interesting, incredibly insightful stuff. Honestly, like I think that's that is exactly why sort of reason I wanted to have you on, because to be able to answer this sort of stuff and not just a blanket statement, but to give a little bit of mechanisms behind it, I think people they'll understand it more. They'll put it in. I want, because I've asked a lot about the guy stuff. I only ask one more big question. It's more for females, really. But a couple of girls sort of obviously come to the end of their preps. The seasons kind of came to the end for them, and they've lost their menstrual cycle. A lot of them has maybe took months to come back. Like, what's your take on obviously, you know, for a start, I suppose why that does actually happen, to give a little bit of an explanation, but also in terms of actually recovering that side of things.
So it's normally caloric restriction. So it gets to a point like a male's production of fertility hormone, a female makes LH and FSH as well. Eventually it comes to a point where, like, in order to maintain immune health, your body uses about 60% of your daily calories to maintain your immune system so you don't die. So it's got a choice between you having an optimal immune system based on the very few calories you've ran yourself into the ground with versus having the potential to produce an egg to become pregnant. And the brain just decides, right, let's preserve what we can. And your production of LH and FSH pretty much diminishes. You also have to view, you know, fat intake goes very low. So now you're low in cholesterol, the building blocks to DHEA and pregnenolone. So you're sort of missing the main building blocks to your steroid hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. The adrenals are taxed, so you've had high levels of stress. In order to make progesterone, it comes from pregnenolone. So that pregnenolone is your main steroid hormone, the mother steroid hormone. If you're very stressed, your progesterone gets converted to cortisol. So it's sort of reversing it is about increasing calories back up to maintenance, removing a lot of the stress. So that for a female, that might mean training intensity has to drop, lowering cardio, improving sleep quality. Um, Most of the time, maybe a small bit of supplementation depending on the adrenal balance, where that is pregnenolone or DHEA. But again, blood work is going to dictate where that person is sitting. Thyroid health. So if thyroid hormone metabolism has been impacted, progesterone is going to be affected. It really just becomes a matter of time and patience and slow caloric intake in order to give the body the energy required to produce these fertility hormones.
If you're not seeing something recovered, say after like 3 to 4 months, are there more underlying issues there that need to be
Yeah,
addressed?
so that then goes back to like liver inflammation, gut inflammation, adrenals, maybe just something's been affected there with cortisol metabolism. The thyroid normally if you have something wrong after all that time, I'm normally suspicious of the thyroid. And then the thyroid's linked to the gut, and then the gut is linked to inflammation, and that could be linked to foods that are being eaten, inflammatory foods, poor blood glucose control. There's a load of different things that, what you're really aiming for is to get LH and FSH back into a positive ratio. And the main goal of returning the menstrual cycle is ovulation. It's not the period, it's ovulation. So the whole point of menstruation is to ovulate, so you produce an egg, and that egg, if it's not fertilized, becomes the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum helps make an elevated amount of progesterone to help with rebuilding the uterine lining for the next ovulation cycle. So it's not really hyper focusing on periods. Bleeding periods occurs when the estrogen level drops slightly when they get to day 28 into the first day of the period. So the estrogen level drops below where it normally sits at that end of the menstrual cycle. It triggers off the shedding of the endometrium. You can have those anovulatory bleeds where you return the period where someone's like, well, I've returned my period, but you've returned a bleed. The return of a menstrual cycle means you've restored ovulation. So looking to restore ovulation is the goal, and the period follows suit after that.
Okay, that's great. I think it's, as you say, then it's just like trying to reduce like stress and increase calories over time. Obviously, get nutrition back. And point being some of the real main take homes from that, and then potentially looking down towards some of the supplementation route with it as well, if necessary.
Yeah, supporting the liver, supporting the thyroid. There's a big picture, but the slow approach of years ago, reverse dieting, normally with a female, you try and bring calories back to maintenance, and they need to oversee the psychological aspect of, putting on weight, not quickly, but in a controlled fashion.
I think there's so much of this is down to when it boils down to you have the science and then you have the psychological assessment in and around that, whether it come actually getting people on or off steroids or whatever that may be. Can I talk a little bit about your bodybuilding journey, Dean? Because like
Yeah,
we've got all this real in-depth stuff. I want to find out a little bit about your own bodybuilding. Obviously, I've seen you compete this year over in Ireland, and I've
yeah,
seen you compete in the past. Like, how has the season been for you? And how has this prep maybe been and different from other preps of the past?
yeah. So I retired officially, and I joke about that in 2022 after winning. Like all years when I first started bodybuilding, I just wanted to win, a national class, and I kept coming close. All years I was doing it, came close, top three, top six. Um, and then we had our kids, and I took a 5 year break, and
5 years, was it?
5 years, 2017 to 22, and at that point, it was sort of like now or never. Let's give this one last go. Um, Won, and then I was happy when I won. I was like, that's the goal achieved. But that was what, October 22. When I had my blood work done in January 23, my cholesterol came back at 8, and I'm looking at it going, that can't be right. So asked for a retest. Done the retest a couple of days later. I'm lucky Morgan's a phlebotomist, so she's able to take my blood for me. She done it, sent it back. Cholesterol came back at 8 again, and I said to her, okay, this is serious. Something's not right. Started thinking over it, done another repeat blood work about 10 days later, and my cholesterol dropped to 5. And I thought, okay, something's changing here. And at the time, I was working alongside the blood lab, and I had discussions with Chris there from his biochemical knowledge and whatever else. And he said to me, have you ever thought about being celiac? And I sat there, I was like, maybe, but my view, I thought was like fatty liver disease. I thought there might be some infection. And he said, well, let's do a celiac check just to rule it out. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, my celiac antibodies came back sky high. And so that made sense. For years. I had loose bowel that I just write off as being, oh, I've had too much sugar. I've had too much, processed food. It's not great with my gut. Never really put two and two together. And the whole problem was every time I got blood work done, I wasn't eating any gluten. Normally, I wouldn't eat gluten, just by not by choice, but just by habit, mainly eating rice-based food. And the only source of real gluten I'd be in my diet, probably in hindsight, why it caused bowel issues was cereal, like Rice Krispies have gluten. Um, and so when I had the blood work done where my cholesterol was 8, I had had a flu and I was eating scrambled eggs and toast quite a bit to get food in. And it was the toast, the bread that triggered off the celiac response. So pretty much all of last year I spent it, trying to heal my gut, knowing, some of the damage that's gone on from the celiac. And then about November time, just, I done a full reset of my gut, fasted for 6 days, cleared a load of inflammation off my body where my face literally just changed. And I said, right, this is interesting. So I done like a mini, 8-week push, gained back quite a bit of tissue, but stayed very, very lean. And I said, right, something's on here, Obviously some of it's going to be muscle memory, but the fact that my body composition didn't really change coming up in body weight. As time went on, we had a holiday planned for this year in August. And before I went away for our first holiday in May, I messaged Callum Raystrick, who was my coach in 22. We stay in touch because I do some work with Pro Coach. He said to me, what about doing, NPC Masters in Milan, for a bit of crack? And I just sort of fobbed it off. I was like, if I was ever, to come out of retirement to compete, my wife was way against it. And, eventually, I said to her, I'd be tempted to do something, but it comes with a price of family and work come first. It's not going to be a prep. It might be, then what ended up happening was I said, right, let's just diet for this holiday, diet for 12 weeks, see how I look. The Emerald Cup had been announced. They said we can hop in that, see how I look. And if needs be, move on to Milan. And obviously, as time went on, got into a proper like prep approach of losing body fat. That was when that BPA show popped up on, my radar. And I said to Callum, let's just hop in that for the crack, no peak. Let's just register, turn up, and won the overall. And it was, you're sort of, in hindsight, I joked with Morgan saying to her, if I ever come out of retirement, it's to win an overall because that's the only thing I've never won. And I said to her, I must have secretly manifested in my brain what was going to happen, by saying that. But, after that, it sort of showed me then that prep shouldn't be how it was all those years ago of, not once have I had a day where I've wanted to just sit around mentally, cognitively, everything has been spot on. Anyone who has, interacted with me over the last 3 months, I can't say they've gotten bad service or, I've had to think heavily around anything or I don't want to do this. And that's got to do with that low inflammation environment, obviously from managing with celiac. And then the mitochondria, which are the things that make energy in your body, being so efficient when there's no inflammation in your body that, dieting wise, my current diet setup is 3,400 calories on a training day, 10,000 steps and 20 minutes cardio in the morning. And then a rest day is 3,200 and the same 10,000 steps, 20 minutes cardio. Can't say I'm really suffering. And then, you know, even in terms of like the setup approach of prep, without talking exactly what has been done, it's about a third of what it was 2 years ago. So, you know, it's one of those ones that if someone was to look at what I'm doing, it's just mind-boggling then of what's changed. And I mean, quite a lot of it I put down to obviously the work that I done with, you know, therapeutic peptides. I've documented a lot of that and highlight in Instagram. That was game changing. And more so even for day to day and cognitive purposes of like progress in business, making decisions, education, whatever else. It's it's something that I wish I knew maybe 5 years ago when I done the last prep because it would have been a completely different year. You know, there was times in 2022's prep where Callum would give me a refeed and I just go, right, the simplest thing with a refeed for me was just a box of Rice Krispies. 300 grams of carbs, just a box of Rice Krispies, easy, job done. And then the next day I'd feel like a brick. Like my body just felt like a brick and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I'd be forcing myself to walk around, everything felt heavy. And in hindsight, it was literally gluten exposure from being gluten free for so many weeks, get a refeed, gluten goes in. I remember, again, this is sort of where it really all ties back around. When we went to properly carb load for the first show of 2022, I was in agony. I've never experienced my stomach. Again, this is on my profile in the celiac highlight. My stomach was literally like I was 9 months pregnant. And that was, again, no gluten for maybe 7 weeks. And all of a sudden I had like Cocoa Pops and Rice Krispies. All I could do is lie on my side most of the day, excessive gas, excessive pain, going to the bathroom. I thought at the time I had um, gastroenteritis. The boys had a stomach bug and I picked it up. I thought, oh, this is just, you know, post-viral IBS, to put it that way. But it was a celiac response. So I'm not going to say I'm done just yet. I've got probably a couple more shows lined up, but it's it's not like where you set a goal and it's like, oh, it's all the way down to show day, and every week it's like, oh, another 2 leg days until show day and whatever. It's literally just get up every day and treat it like a normal day, follow the diet, follow the routine, but there's no pressure. There's no, I need to do this.
You're not like dying. So it's
And
like you say, get the shoes at the end. Like,
again, I took the philosophy of 22's prep of my training since then. When Aaron Casey came up with my training plan, has always been 2 reps in reserve. So I found if you train that way, you retain the tissue, but you never generate the fatigue of your nervous system where you're completely effed because you're trying to beat a logbook. You're trying to do everything possible just to lift a heavy weight. That causes fatigue, causes sleep issues, causes appetite issues, causes low mood then because you're starving. Training effectively that your recovery is optimized, you never run into those issues then.
yeah.
And so training's enjoyable. You go in and train legs. You're not worried about, oh, I have to get 8 reps in this hack squat today because the book says so. The recovery management perspective, again, another thing completely oversaw when you're in prep. Like, you don't need to annihilate yourself. Like, no one cares how hard you destroyed yourself in the gym once you turn up on stage inside out.
And is this something you and Cal, would you like, I mean, obviously Cal's coaching you, but is this something that you're very kind of back and forth with him in terms of, you know, sort of giving your thoughts on it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably one of the easiest guys for Cal to coach because it's literally when you want pictures, let's do another set tomorrow. Send it through. How's everything? Perfect. You know, it's not like, oh, I'm dying, you know, I'm starving. And it's like, all right, let's do pictures in another couple of days. And it's literally, you know, we've done before the holiday, my refeeds were probably twice per week and they were like 500-gram carb refeed. So there was never a time where I was hungry. It was more so you had to keep up with my metabolism. And that's more so, again, when we went on vacation, I developed lactose intolerance after our first holiday in May, with getting poisoned by a stupid supplement that had gluten that I didn't even realize. And that destroyed part of my gut for a while. Because after that holiday for weeks, my gut just, I kept having loose stool. Couldn't figure it out. And then just by chance, I got a new lactase supplement, took that, and my gut went back to normal. I was like, all right, it's whey protein that's causing the problem.
Okay.
Cut the whey protein out, my stool was perfect. So cut milk out for all that prep to speak. When we went on holiday there, ran out of our vegan protein, something that needs vegan ISO, and I had to find some protein source. I still sort of had a macro meal to follow when I was away, like a macro split, so to make sure that I didn't lose weight or gain weight. So we set my like maintenance calories at 4,000. I thought, okay, I'll just get lactose-free milk protein puddings, and that would be, an easy 40 grams of protein.
I'll get you.
And so ate them, and then I woke up the next morning a kilo heavier, and I was like, what's going on here? But then thought, okay, well, it's a bit more fluid. It's roasting here in Lanzarote. My glutes, need a bit of cushioning. The fluid can stay in my body. I'm happy. But by the time I got to the end of the holiday, my stomach was all sort of bloated. I was like to Morgan, that's the milk protein causing a reaction. Looked visually good. You're walking around filled with fluid and full and whatever and veiny, but you know inside that something's not right. So came home, done nearly a 4-day fast, and in the space of 4 days, 18 pounds of water come off me. And it's 18, and it's well known that milk protein, casein, a type of casein that's in milk protein, can cause inflammation in the body. So it can either cause lymphatic blockage, it can cause gastrointestinal disturbance, depending on your genetics. And that's clearly the only thing, because I've gone back to my diet where there's no milk again. And my weight is sitting at the baseline of 85 as it was before I went on holiday. So,
Is the fasting for you one of the big things? Like, is that one of the things that a lot of people could do if they are suffering with that sort of issue?
If you suspect that you have a GI problem, you fast, I think. For now, very hard to, recommend fasting. If you've never done an extended fast, it does get a bit ropey in that 24 hours, you'll normally do no problem.
Yeah.
When you get to anything over 2 days, when you get to about hour 40 to 44, you're going to start depleting your liver's glycogen. And at that point, your body's trying to swap over between, normal glycolytic metabolism to ketosis, so burning ketones for energy. So you can have blood sugar instability, you can have headache, dehydration. So at that point, you have to anticipate what's going to happen. And if you're aware of it, you just stay hydrated. You just understand that the headache that's coming is going to go away in a couple of hours once you're into ketosis. Oddly enough, once you get past, hour 48 to 50, your appetite just disappears and you're not even interested in food. You just stay, I've drank loads of these electrolyte bottles. Just stay hydrated during the fast. And once you have no psychological food focus, the problem with me is once you start getting to like hour 90 or thereabouts, you're burning a lot of fat in your body, that if your body has really bad fat metabolism. So I tend to not tolerate fat too well. I don't produce enough lipase. Your body starts flushing it out. So Callum's like, this is a rapid fat loss phase, because I did end up losing more body fat, like off the edges of my glutes and hamstrings from doing the fast. But, when you're having to run to the toilet because your bowel is flushing out oil, basically, it's not good. So it's definitely, from an inflammatory perspective, you'll take a lot of inflammation off. And then it's up to you to figure out what food was causing the inflammation. And very easy with me here was to pinpoint milk protein, because it's the only change.
I think it's so interesting when you talk about that sort of thing, because I think like a lot of bodybuilders will go through, they're putting weight on and be like, this is just part of the way it is. Like there's a lot of that. Yeah. Like as soon as you said about the proteiny stuff when you're away on holiday, you get that and you're like, Jesus Christ, my stomach's sitting there.
Yeah.
Off. But now that you say that, like a lot of that does make you go, come on,
like even now, not to like speak crudely, I'll only go to the bathroom once, and that's a pun week. Every morning, the exact same time, I'll drink a black coffee and then I'll go to the toilet. And that's it for the day. One solid bowel movement. I know as soon as I've had something that's really pissed off my GI tract or immune system, I'm going, twice a day, or I'll have a loose stool. to me, in hindsight, that's one of the biggest regrets that I didn't sit down and go, Dean, something's not right here. You know, in the off season, you're eating your post workout meal of like, the funny thing I used to show people is in the NutriBullet, nearly a box of Rice Krispies, NutriBullet it into like a flour and make it up into like a pudding and eat that. So you could eat, you know, quite a lot of carbohydrates easily. I'd eat that meal and in a space of half an hour I have to run to the toilet. And I think, oh, that's just because you ate too much food in one go and your gut is a bit off. But it's actually an inflammatory response to my gut going, why are you giving me gluten?
No, it's something I'm gonna have to look into a little bit more myself. Just a lot of this stuff, I'm like listening, that it's ringing true, and I think there's with a lot of people, it will be exactly the same thing. Listening, going, ah, there's more to this, you know.
Yeah, it definitely, you know, the way I always view it, right? If you have optimal bowel function, you will have a bowel movement in the morning time and generally 12 hours later at night if you're going to have another. So they operate, you know, on a 12-hour basis. If it's anything beyond that, you've either got too fast of a stomach transit time, which can happen, and that's normal. But if it's that, you know, you've eaten something and you have to run to the toilet after eating, your body's had a response to that food going into the system that something's not right and you should figure it out, then just accept it's part of bodybuilding, because we accept it as being, you know, standard, but it's not normal.
Yeah, we lose sight of what's normal at a point. I think it just kind of go up.
Pretty much, yeah.
Dane, I want to thank you for your time, mate. I'm very conscious of taking up loads of it, but like I think the amount of value and the amount of you could probably answer questions all day there and probably talk all day as well. So yeah, I very much appreciate it because I want to get, you know, Irish educators, Northern Irish, Southern Irish educators on this as well, coaches that can kind of build the platform and highlight a little bit more. So like somebody like yourself that has so much knowledge to give, I very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
If people want to find you, because there's quite a few things you're doing at the minute, you know, give yourself a shout out as to where they can.
So I guess the main place is DNSTM on Instagram. So it's my main handle. Same for YouTube, but I don't really have much. There's a PCT video on YouTube from years ago with a protocol in the description. If you ever need help, you know, to learn about some level of PCT, you'll see a very naive 27-year-old me being a bit anxious in front of the camera for the first time. I've got, obviously we've got supplement needs, so supplementneeds.co.uk for anyone in Northern Ireland. In the south, MyCore and Strom Sports Ireland retail supplement needs products. And we've got the education platform, SN Education. And then we've got a nice, interesting new hub facility with a gym coming in the next 7 weeks. So if you're on Instagram, Supplement Needs is our handle on YouTube and Instagram, that if you want to watch how the building's evolving, we're documenting it at the moment.
Where will that be, Dean?
Pool. It's literally 5 minutes from our current site of operation. We've purchased a big, massive 8,000 square foot building that we're converting. So it's all been tracked and documented on YouTube for anyone who's interested.
Fantastic, Dean, mate. So please go check Dean out. There's absolutely like, so much invaluable content out there, and it's another level above what a lot of people are offering. But thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and then watch the podcast. And again, there's every single week we're having somebody else on. So go on the channel, support it, get behind it. Let's get behind Irish bodybuilding, grow together.